notice 2:00 study session for the Palm Desert City Council, December 16, 2021. And Todd, direct
Yes.
as you see fit.
Okay, thank you. So as staff informed the council during the last budget session, we had retained the assistance of Matrix consultant to work with ourselves, our partners at CAL FIRE, Chief Beverlin, who's on the line, his staff, to do three basic analyses. One was just to analyze the location of the city's fire stations in terms of the service level we're providing, response times. And then we also at the same time were taking a look at the condition assessment of all three of our current fire stations, and wanted to make sure that we had time to objectively take a holistic look at what is happening in Palm Desert, what's expected to happen. We've definitely been experiencing population growth, new homes, especially in the northern part of the city, and we knew that was having some impact on service levels and service demands. So Lori Carney is here today to take us through the results of those studies, and we've got some specific recommendations for council after the analysis. And she's got Chief Beverlin and our consultant from our Matrix consultant representative here as well to support her in case you have any questions. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Lori to take us through the presentation.
Hi, thank you, Mayor and City Manager. As Todd said, we have Terry Lewis here from Matrix Consulting, so that if you have any questions about the findings in the report or how the report was conducted, he'll be able to answer those, and Division Chief Beverlin from the Fire Services. So I will start by sharing my screen. Share and beginning. Can you all see the presentation? Okay, great, thank you. So as Todd said, we are going to, excuse me, we're going to go through our fire facility study, kind of stepping through what we have planned for this study session. We're going to briefly talk about our current fire and EMS resources, the Matrix study recommendations, one of their recommendations being adding a 4th fire station, its location and timing, some budget forecasts for both construction and operations, excuse me, funding sources, and what our next steps may be.
Now, Jan's like, why would we bring attention to that?
So just as some background for members of the public who may be watching, fire and EMS services are provided to Palm Desert through a contract with the County of Riverside. The County of Riverside in turn contracts with CAL FIRE for these services, as they have done for nearly 100 years, since early in the last century. That being said, the city of Palm Desert built and owns 3 fire stations in South Palm Desert, known as Mesa View or 67, the Town Center Station, Station 33, and the station on Country Club. We own 4 active ambulances. One of those ambulances is housed in Indian Wells at their station to serve our eastern population. We have a medic squad that we own in Station 71 that the council approved, I think, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and a ladder truck, which we own cooperatively with Indian Wells and Rancho Mirage. The staffing and the engines and supplemental services and equipment are provided through this agreement with the county. Just as a recap, a reminder, this is the location of our current station: 67 Mesa View, 33 Town Center, 71 our Country Club station, and then Medic 55 is in Indian Wells. So Indian Wells, I think, is right about here is where their city hall is. So as Todd mentioned, we contracted with Matrix Fire Services to conduct a study of whether or not our current stations are providing adequate coverage for our current and future needs. Some of the things they looked at included the impacts of the arena project north of I-10. That was one of the factors that precipitated this study. Also, future residential and commercial growth in the North Sphere, which, as we know, has thankfully kicked up in the last year or so, and demographic trends that may be occurring in Palm Desert as we look forward. They also looked at what the current calls for service and utilization rate of current equipment was, and the location of a fourth station and service level capabilities of a fourth station. They had 4 key findings that we're going to touch on today. Their first finding was that there are opportunities to improve the capturing of performance data. Work on that is currently in progress with the county. They are looking at those areas themselves and will be implementing new processes as they develop them. The city and the fire department should adopt travel time performance goals. So that's in progress as well with the county, but the city can also create its own performance and travel time goals. That's one of the things we'll talk about a little later in the presentation. They had a finding that the current automatic mutual aid system works well to provide effective response force in the city. So that is the closest, we've talked about that before. That's the theory that the closest piece of equipment responds to any emergency. So sometimes that means that the closest piece of equipment is another city's piece of equipment. Sometimes the closest piece of equipment in Indian Wells, for example, might be a Palm Desert ambulance, but that is working well. Matrix found that that works well to provide services to our community. Lastly, and the finding that we are going to focus a lot of our attention to today is that unit utilization rates are high in stations 71 and 33. And we've talked about that for the last couple of years. We knew that 71 was getting busier and busier. And the same thing is happening in 33 now. But that's impacting performance and it's increasing response times. So the Matrix study finds that a fourth station is needed to provide services to our community. Again, as some background information as we're going through this, you may recognize this from the recent CVEP newsletter, but I thought it was a nice way that they put together population changes in the last census. So as you can see, Palm Desert had about a 5% growth in the last 10 years, greater than some of our neighbors, less than others. But what I thought was really interesting and I wanted to draw your attention to is that they highlighted one of the largest rises in populations as being in our northern area, the area that we're talking about today as a potential location for a fourth station is the place where we're seeing the most population growth. And it makes sense because, as you know, we have a lot of entitled housing out there and it's getting built and people are moving in. So this map was created by the Matrix consultants using call data that they received from the county. So it's a heat map. You can see where the majority of calls are happening. So we've talked about this country club hotspot in the past, right? And that's served primarily, as we know, from 71. There's also a hotspot of calls here that's primarily served by 33. And that's what we would expect too. This is the densest part of our city. This is where our retail and commercial cores are. This is where most of our multifamily housing is. But we can see that there are some other spots that are kind of bubbling up here in this area where the proposed station is going in. And as you know, this is an area where we're seeing a lot more commercial development, the new hotels, the La Quinta Brewery, and some other commercial areas. And then this is also another retail area, and Shadow Ridge timeshares, which receives a fair amount of attention from our fire and EMS services. So I included this chart, which was in the Matrix study that we sent you, because I thought it was really useful and it illuminated an idea for me. When we talk about our call volumes, I think sometimes I tended to think that they're distributed equally throughout the day, but that's not the case. Our call volumes really do cluster around the middle of the day. Sometimes that feels a little counterintuitive. You know, you think that people are calling the ambulance in the middle of the night, but what's actually happening is this time period, you know, from about 9 to 4, and of course on Friday evening, which is another little hot, that's where the calls are clustered. And that's important because one of the things we're going to talk to you about is not just call volume, but concurrent calls. So when we have multiple calls for service coming in at the same time. So as you can see here, this is a record of the concurrent calls for service for the last 3 years. And so the way that you can read this chart is that for these calls at that time, there was one call for service at that time. But 30% of the time, there were 2 or more calls for service happening at the same time. And that impacts our performance because, for example, if 71 is responding to a call in their area and another call for service comes in their area, then equipment from station 33 has to respond to that call, which is then backing up response times in that area, and it has a cascading effect. Chief Beverly, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Just that, the concurrent calls, there's 2 concurrent calls going on at 30%. Then there's also 3 calls simultaneously happening almost 8% of the time. So basically you can just deduce by these numbers that those percentages are going to continue to go up if we don't do anything. And they will be improved as we add units into the total system to be able to handle those concurrent calls.
Councilmember Harnick, you have a question?
I do. I appreciate this, and I see where we're going with it. I don't quite understand when we add them up, they don't add up in the total column. When we look at, the bottom one.
Mm-hmm.
So are we talking about, how does that work? We have 2, 1, and 1, and then it says total 57. So is that
2?
And then the one above it, 16, 18, 34, and 28, 52, and it says 58.
So I will ask Terry, can you respond to that? This was their data from their report.
One of the things that occurs when you start putting that together, and I shouldn't say, let me back up to say that the 32,000 calls, sometimes the CAD data, there's issues with the CAD data. And I don't know why the ones going across don't add up. I cannot answer that question. But it's a lot of times the CAD data you don't get, maybe you don't get a time stamp for, there's no time stamp for a call or for a unit that might be available or gets on the scene or something like that. So sometimes those numbers, but I can't really answer why that going across doesn't, because it sure should.
Okay, because there's a few of those. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that we're talking about with concurrent calls and the volume of calls is their impact on our response times. So I've given you a couple of pieces of information here. So one is a population density map, which I think is useful because it shows us something that's not unexpected, but it's good to always check in, which is that our population is most dense around our downtown core area, but we have some other areas that are leaning into more dense populations here. And then of course it's less dense here because over by I-10, just because that development hasn't happened yet. That's just background information. But when we think about response times, there's a couple of different things to keep in mind. So there's the National Fire Protection Association, which studies this on a national scale. There's some information in this on page 34 of the study that was provided to you, some more background information on this. Their recommendation for an ideal state for saving lives and property is for the first piece of equipment to arrive on the scene in 4 minutes. So that's the ideal state of recommended response time. The current goal that Palm Desert services have been working towards is 5 minutes. 1 minute for call processing, and then 4 minutes from wheels on the ground to person at the scene. That's what our goal is. In the matrix study, they discuss reasons that communities can choose to have a higher than ideal response rate, if that's a good way to put that. So you can make, as a community, due to your geography and your resources and your demographics, you may decide to choose a different response time. Their recommendation is 5 minutes and 12 seconds for engine 71 and 33, which are in our more densely populated areas, and 6 minutes and 30 seconds for engine 67 because it's in a geographically less dense population area. Savvy, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And maybe we're going to get there, but intuitively, the shorter the response time, the better for our residents, right? So why
Yes.
would we settle for a goal that is longer than what is recommended nationally?
Resources.
So, okay, and that's important. So it's not that we're choosing to do that necessarily, it's that recognizing the limitations,
Mhm.
we feel compelled to set that high, that kind of a lower goal, higher time response.
I think, yeah, I don't know if I would characterize it that the city felt compelled in the past. I think they felt that 5 minutes was a reasonable goal considering the resources that they had, but you may choose to reevaluate that.
At a later time, maybe we can come back to this because I would want to better understand why we have the longer response time as a goal. And if we chose to address that, what the barriers are and what would it take to bring the response time down?
Well, we will be talking about that partially through this presentation, and then also the county is going to be doing some presentations in the future on that. Mayor Kelly, did you have another question?
Thank you for that exchange. That was helpful. I just wanted to clarify that I heard something correctly about the longer proposed time for engine 67. What I heard you say is that that longer time is in part a function of geography,
Yes.
because that would be the engine heading up 74, for example, to Guia Hills or to other more remote locations where, unless you had a fire station in a very, very low populated area, you just couldn't expect to do better.
I think that's exactly right. Chief Beverly can speak to it in more detail, but I know when we talked about this before that it's 74, it's Kauai Hills, it's some of those country clubs that are by their nature winding and with different obstacles to entry that geographically take a little bit longer to get to. So what we see with it, did you have any other questions on that or comments on that? On how you decide what you want to be working towards? So the next thing that we have here is a result of the study that the Matrix consultants did. So they looked at our system performance. They use what is a standard in the industry, which is arriving. What is the performance 90% of the time? That's where they talk about this 90% fractile, but they've also given us an average. And as we can see over our entire system, we're not meeting our goals with performance. We're not meeting the goals of what we want to have for our average response or our response 90% of the time. And Chief Beverlin is here. He can speak to that a little bit more, but that is the basic finding of the study and their experience as well in CAL FIRE, that we're not meeting those goals.
Yeah, and I would just say a couple things about this slide. So number one, the NFPA Fire Protection Association recommendation is a 4-minute response time, 90% of the time, and that does not include the dispatch process. So the Palm Desert's current goal, as shown on the slide, is basically the same goal is the National Fire Protection Association, which is a 1-minute dispatch processing time and a 4-minute travel time to the incident. Secondly, it's our feeling, and backed up by the matrix report, that the concurrent calls are one of the main contributors to the longer. As you can see, in 2018, the fractile average was 5 minutes and 37 seconds. In 2019, it went down a little bit, but we're attributing that to the less amount of calls due to the pandemic and everybody staying at home. It increased in 2020, and I would imagine once we're able to study 2021, it would continue down that trend. So with the concurrent calls increasing over the years, that's just elongating our response times, and we're relying a lot on mutual aid from other parts of the system to be able to cover all the calls in Palm Desert.
Mhm. Okay, moving on. So the matrix consultants that we engaged with have recommended, based upon their analysis and their study, that the fourth station is needed now to serve the current Palm Desert residents and visitors. In our discussion with them, they made it clear that that is, whether or not there was an arena, the demand is there now and will continue to grow for the station as we have planned it in the university area. They found through their study, and you can see their proposed map, that the station should be located at the university site. We asked them to look at kind of a blank slate, even though we have land set aside there. Was there a better place? And they didn't find that there was. So that speaks well to the planning that went into place about 14 years ago, and that we have land set aside there for a fourth station. This map that they provided us shows a 4-minute drive time from these different stations as they would be located, and a 4 to 5.5 minute drive time. So this is the arrangement that provides the best coverage for the city. This is a map that was provided by our partners in CAL FIRE. So this is just a map looking at the 2020 incidents. If we highlighted those that were in a 4-minute radius of the proposed location for the station, what would that look like? And you see each of these dots is one of those calls. So it ran about, that would be about 1,200 calls. And you can see that the vast majority of those calls are within this predicted Palm Desert area. There are some in the county, as we would expect. As we know, we do that closest piece of equipment, and would travel to the two incidents across the freeway some of the time, but the vast majority of calls would be within the city of Palm Desert. So a new fourth station, what does that
Sorry,
look
can I
like?
ask a question before we get a little further? In one of the maps, you mentioned the lead time, the one before that.
Yes.
Thank you. So in looking at the study recommendations, I've seen in one place the metric is just the call time, and the other is the call time with the 1 minute added. So which version are we looking at this one? Is this including the dispatch time or excluding?
This is just the drive time, unless Terry wants to correct me. I believe this is just the drive time. Or
Yes, this map is strictly drive time.
yeah.
This map shows wheels rolling to wheels stopped.
Right.
So it does not include any dispatch time or any time for firefighters to board apparatus. This is strictly when wheels start rolling to when they stop.
Right. And
Does
so
that makes sense? And,
Yes.
and understand that the 4-minute time is 4 minutes is a travel time. That's the what's termed as the gold standard. That's the ideal, as she was saying earlier. The 5:30 is it's a time that's been recognized, not necessarily recognized, but it's been used by other communities as 70% passing rate, if you will. That's kind of where that comes from. So the 5:30 kind of gives you an idea of how far out you can stretch with another minute and a half, depending on where you're coming from. And this is also based on the fact that resources are coming from the fire stations. If they're not in the fire stations, then obviously that time is going to be off. We have to use a starting point, and the starting point on any of these maps is the fire station itself.
Councilmember Jonathan, you had a question?
Yeah, and I apologize for going backwards for a second. I wasn't going to ask the question, but it's bugging me. We had a previous slide that showed the annual response times, and there was a drop, I think, in 2019. And I thought I heard you, Chief Beverland, indicate that that was due to COVID, but COVID didn't start till March 20th. So if I'm correct, and there was a drop in 19, it might be meaningful for us to understand why it dropped, because maybe we can replicate favorable conditions or favorable behavior. And again, my apologies for going backwards. I was going to let it go, and then it just kind of kept gnawing at me.
No worries.
So as you recall, a lot of the traditional statistics that we've been analyzing over the years, once the pandemic kind of took foot and we had the stay-at-home orders, it completely threw off all of our standard ways of analyzing trends and all of those things. So, you know, our IT and GIS department continue to study these statistics, but from what we've gathered, it seems that in late 2000, you know, last quarter of 2019, going into 2020 is when we really started seeing the trends drop off. We had, you know, days when Engine 71 and Medic 71 didn't actually go out of the station except for to go pick up food and whatnot. And usually they run, you know, 20 calls a day. So we definitely saw a slowdown for a short period. I would say that it was probably right around a quarter or so. And then once things kind of opened up, it didn't return to normal levels, but it did increase somewhat. And then as you see now in 2021, the trends are kind of spiking in a much more elevated line than they are from 2020, just because so many people want to be out and about now versus, you know, taking care of those risks.
Chief, we can circle back to it. I wasn't asking about 20 and 21. I noted that 2019 was a drop in response time. And my question was, why in 2019 did we do better, right? And maybe that was the slide.
Yeah,
I thought it was even more pronounced than that. I think there was another slide that showed the drive time was even better. Anyway, we can circle back to it, or you can get back to us, but it looked to me like 2019. And Laura, I think there was another slide that showed anyway, it looked like 2019 was a good year, and I'm just wondering why that was, because maybe we can learn from it.
I'd be happy to look that up and try to get something back to you.
You know, one of the ways, Councilmember Jonathan, that we may want to look at it then is maybe monthly, right, for that 2019, and see what there were any anomalies about, you know, 2019 or that happened, or whether it was just one of those oddities. It's so long ago now that I can't remember what the world was like then. So, okay, moving on. Did you guys have any other questions about these travel times or response times? Because that's the important driver here. That's the reason why we're making this recommendation, is system performance. So whatever we can do to make it good for our community. So a fourth station, what does that look like? The recommendation is that we would locate it in the university area in the land that we set aside over 13 years ago. So again, that was good planning and good foresight then. The estimated cost to build this station, based upon information we have from architects and the experience of the city of Indio, who's currently further along in this process than we are, is that it'll be about $14 million to construct, fit, and furnish it. As part of that, we would have to add two pieces of equipment. One would be an engine. That would be a one-time $800,000 purchase. And the other one would be adding an ambulance, which would be about a $300,000 purchase once it was completely outfitted. Staffing for the new station would be a total of 15 people. 11 of those people would be new. 4 of those people we would transfer from 71, because if you recall last year we added 4 people with that medic squad. We would transfer those people to the new station. And 3 of those positions, our partners with the county have agreed to fund those, cost share those with us, because as we saw, they will be providing some service into the county of Riverside. So just a brief overview, and we'll take a deeper dive into this, but a brief overview of how we envision that you could fund this project is with project area 4 bonds. There's about $10 to $12 million available there. The Fire Facilities Fund, which is development impact fees that have been collected in that part of the city for this specific purpose over the last 10 or 15, 20 years. I'm not sure exactly how long. A county contribution of $2.5 million towards construction. And the balance of that funds that would be needed could come from Project Area 2 bonds repurposed from the I-10 interchange. Councilmember Jonathan, did you have a question?
I did. As you're getting into the finances and the cost of building, I'm wondering, because, you know, we saw that the operating expenditures for fire went from, on average, the last few years, they were just under $14 million. And then this current year went to over 16. So from under 14 to over 16 million annually. And I'm wondering what adding a fire station would do to our operational budget and where that would come from. Has staff looked at that, and is that later on?
That is our next slide. You read our minds.
My bad. And
now
then
that we had our next slide.
Okay, so I'll wait for that. But on this slide, I hope there'll be some discussion about the I-10 interchange, which I believe you're referring to the Portola interchange, and whether we're ready to abandon that effort.
That's right. That is exactly the conversation that we hope to have. So, as you have mentioned, as you just discussed, and as is important for everyone to think about, is what would it look like? What would the impact of adding this station be? So what I have here is a couple of year look back and a 5-year forecast for operations, including the addition of a 4th station. So what we have here at the top are our revenues. This fiscal year 21-22, I've made an adjustment. This is our budgeted numbers, but I've made an adjustment here because the city received residual property tax pass-through this year. And speaking with Janet this morning, we're not sure if that will be a continuing thing, or if we will get future residual tax payments that will increase the property fire tax. But we did get an additional $1.3 million over what we had anticipated in 2021. But as we go forward, we're anticipating, about 3% growth in this county property fire tax. The Palm Desert's Prop A fire tax, which is that $60 per resident fee, that grows very slowly, but it does grow as you add rooftops. Our EMS cost recovery. So this prediction is based upon just an inflationary gain, but it is something that we will be looking at in the next year. We implemented this fee just 4 years ago, so next year will be a good time for us to take a look back and make sure we're still charging an appropriate fee to recover as much of the cost as we possibly can. We do have reimbursement for the ladder truck. Remember that, oh, I'm so sorry. So remembering that we co-own the ladder truck with Indian Wells and Rancho Mirage, and there is a Cove Commission formula for sharing the cost of operations for that truck. Part of that cost is based upon calls. So when that truck responds to calls in Rancho Mirage or Indian Wells, we receive some funds back for the operation of the truck. We have some miscellaneous fees. They're really de minimis. But what I'd like to draw your attention to is that starting in 23-24, we would have a cost share of operations from the county. That's them funding the 3 positions that we talked about, and a $2.5 million contribution for construction. When we look at our services and the expenditures, as you said, Sabby, they did go up. Oh, I'm sorry. Mayor Kelly, did you have a question now?
I'm confused by including the county contribution to construction in the operating revenue. It feels like we're trying to spend it 2 places.
I understand.
And we could, Mayor Kelly, that might have been just an oversight on my part. I apologize. We talked about moving the capital and the construction off, and I may have missed that. I apologize.
So, but going back to the fire fund expenditures, so we have here what our service contract is for 33, 67, and 71, and then the other miscellaneous fees that we have: utilities, admin fees, repair, maintenance for buildings, etc. So as you mentioned, Councilmember Jonathan, we have seen an increase. The biggest part of that increase was adding 4 positions and the squad to 71. One of the things that we anticipate doing is moving those people to the new station to sort of mitigate and offset some of the costs of creating that 4th station. You see here the addition of the 4th station in 23-24. That's when we forecast that you could open it. So you see the cost of operations for 33, 67, and 71 going down as we move those 4 people. Overall, your costs are going to go up about, well, I won't say a percentage because I don't know what it is and I don't want to misspeak. But I did find that each station represents about 15% of the total cost of our contract. And then going forward, that's what it would look like. This is basically a 2% escalator going into the future years, and a transfer from the general fund increasing as we go. Councilmember Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you. So I think I'm looking at this correctly when I say that for several years, quite a number of years, let me go back a step. So essentially, we get certain fire fund revenues, and then we have fire fund operating expenses, and there's always a delta, there's a shortage, and that shortage is funded out of the general fund. And historically, that ran around $3 million per year. Then in this current year, it jumped to 4 million, and in 22-23 will likely be 4 million again. And then I do think that 2.5 is an error. So essentially, starting with the new station, it would jump. We've been at 3, then I went to 4 for a couple of years, and now we're jumping to, let's call it 6, because by the time we get there, it'll be 6. So kind of a 2-part question. Number 1, would increasing the Prop A fire tax like 50%, let's just say went from 60 to 90, would that increase revenues in that line item by 50%? So roughly $1,250,000 or $1,300,000 or whatever. And the second part of the question is, has staff looked at other ways that we can avoid hitting the general fund up for this shortage?
I will let Ms. Moore answer that question.
Yes, that's one of the reasons why we're going to be doing an EMS cost recovery review again, to understand if our costs are covered for the medical services that are provided by the fire department. As you remember, we were provided with information that was now old, and that information is at 5 years old. So we need to ensure their costs have gone up, but we have not changed our fees. So we'll be looking at that. That's one thing. The Prop A fire tax, yes, it would add that. The one thing that we don't, I don't know, on the county property fire tax, we have had, as you all have seen, we have had a tremendous surge in sales of properties. The inventory out there is limited, but prices have increased. That is going to increase the fire tax. The challenge that I have, which is why I was hesitant, and I told Lori that we need to be consistent with our increase here, is that it's a two-year lookout. The county does not they get the information, but they do not put that on the tax roll. And it's a 24-month turnaround before they do. One of the reasons why our county property fire tax was high in 21-22 is twofold. One, 2 years ago, we had a tremendous property tax value increase. That was at the start of the pandemic, and now it's just happening that we're seeing it happen. The second thing is, 2 years ago, the successor agency sold properties and the taxing entities get funding from those residual receipts. So that's an anomaly, but that is one thing. That's why we didn't escalate it from there, because it's not a true number. It's just based on property sales. We do anticipate that we have some other sales that are going to happen here pretty soon at Desert Willow and some of the sites that we still have. Those could impact that. But my bigger thought that what I really need to spend a little bit of time to do is to look at the assessed valuations of the properties in Palm Desert and where we stand right now and when those will come in. As far as the rest of cost recovery, really, you're going to be looking at a ballot measure, which could be increasing your Prop A fire tax. That would be one of the things. It does take a 2/3 vote of the population in order to increase that or to put a new ballot measure on the tax roll, but that is something that we could look at. Now, alternatively, I think we've talked just very generically about a sales tax increase. We've talked about a utility tax, and we've talked about those things. I always have to say that, even though I know it's not the popular thing to think about. So with that, yes, we are. I know that's the long answer, but I wanted to share with you there are multiple things that are going on at the same time that we're trying to watch all of them.
Councilmember Quintanilla, did you have a question?
I do, thank you. My question is following the similar thread of Councilmember Jonathan and looking at the growth, but I'm looking at the line item that says other, the admin fees, utilities, etc. So what goes along into those et ceteras that make it grow? And as we look at the utilities, what are the plans to facilitate green energy and renewable energy into bringing some of these older facilities current?
Okay, great, thank you. So the admin fees there's an admin fee from the county. That's really a de minimis fee. Some of the other fees that go along with it is that has to do with our EMS billing. So we have a third-party contractor that we use to actually perform the billing for the EMS transports for us. There's some costs associated with that, and those costs they escalate, over time with inflation, but they also are based on the number of calls. There's also, because we are an ambulance service provider and bill Medi-Cal and Medicare, there are fees that we have to pay to the state. So those are where those fees come in. And as far as utilities and repair and maintenance for the buildings, that is something that we want to talk about actually coming up next is, so you were also prescient in your question and predicted where we were going, because our other facilities, particularly stations 33 and 71, are aging and were not designed with energy efficiency in mind. They weren't designed even with the effective use of a modern fire station in mind. And so while we have taken some measures to try to increase energy efficiency at, say, 33 by literally walling in, some windows and doing things like that, getting new air conditioners. They're old buildings and they're inefficient. So we're going to talk to you about the possibility of replacing them.
Thank you, Lori.
Were there any other questions about the impacts of adding a fourth station to your system in terms of the ongoing costs? Okay, moving along. So as as we just talked about, we have several projects that we think are necessary to bring the system into the modern age. So for the fourth station, which we believe is the most pressing issue, you have capital construction of about $14 million, station equipment that we talked about, and that brings you to about $15.1 million. Diving in a little bit further, we have the county contribution of 2.5 million. So as Janet mentioned, this is where we had moved it to, so I apologize for missing that on the previous slide. The Fire Facilities Fund, those developer impact fees, which we have been collecting for this purpose. And as more houses get built, we will collect some amount more, but I'm not sure that it will be a significant amount since a lot of those things have already gone through the plan check process, I think. So we have Project Area 4 bonds, Project Area 2 bonds reallocated if the council is supportive, reallocated from the Portola I-10 interchange, and that would fund this station. Looking ahead, we believe that Station 71 also, for a variety of issues, due to the age of the building, its footprint constraints. If you're familiar with 71, it's kind of in a tiny postage stamp, and it was designed at an awkward angle. When that station was built, it was literally the edge of town. It was considered to be, you know, the edge of town, and not really designed forward thinking as to how it would be used in the future. And so because of the issues with that station, its age, its footprint, its site constraints, modernizing it will cost you nearly as much as deconstructing and rebuilding it. So the recommendation from staff is that in order to make the improvements that you could make in effectiveness of the layout of the station and efficiencies such as energy efficiencies and that sort of thing, it would be better to rebuild that station at that location. And the funding for that could come from those Project Area 2 bonds if they were reallocated from the Portola I-10 interchange. Looking forward, even forward future to Station 33, which has a lot of its own issues. It has, we looked at modernizing it. There are significant issues with that station with subsidence. Apparently, shortly after it was built in the mid-80s, it already started suffering from subsidence, and they did a concrete injection into the ground there. It's an older building. It is now 40 years old, and it's not designed to operate the way that we would operate a fire station today. It doesn't house people in the way that we consider to be functional today. And so again, we believe that the best course of action there would be to replace it, to deconstruct it and rebuild it at that location. It's in a good location. So before I call on you for your question, Councilmember Quintanilla, I wanted to point out that for that station, while there is $8 million in the fire fund, because we knew that we would need to be making improvements, we need to be building a force station. Janet, in her foresight, has been reserving money in the fire fund, saving her pennies for a rainy day. And we do have $8 million accumulated there, but that would leave a delta of about $4.8 million for that station. And now, Councilmember Quintanilla, do you have a question?
Got to unmute. Thank you, Ms. Lori. My question is less about the 4.8 delta as it is about where the adjustment and response times would fall once one of these stations is out of commission, because clearly we're here because we don't have adequate response time. So in preparing to improve response time, we will inevitably cause a delay in others. So how would that offset be planned for? How would our residents know that their services would still be covered?
So included in these plans, and we've been working with Holt Architects. And we had invited Thomas Howell to our meeting. I'm not sure if he was able to make it in, but in looking at it and getting these estimates, these estimates include setting up some temporary housing or a temporary station. So in the past, when we redid Station 67, for example, they set up trailers. Hello, thank you for joining us. We set up some temporary trailers and staging. We looked for 71 because of this. For Station 33, that seems like it would be potentially more doable because there's a lot of empty parking lot around it, at least at this time. For Station 71, the city does own some land on Country Club and also on Portola and Frank Sinatra that we think we could stage a temporary station on while we rebuilt the new station, if that was what the direction that the council wanted to go.
Before we take Councilmember Johnson's question, I just want to feature for us, we have about 9 minutes left. So we need to prioritize what's most critical for feedback today. But let's take care of Sammy's question.
Okay.
Thank you. And a brief answer would be sufficient and appreciated. You mentioned, Lori, that we own that parcel at the entrance to Desert Willow on Country Club. It occurs to me that might be a better location for a station because it's not surrounded by senior residential housing, which Station 71 now is. And also, if the new one is built there, then we're not losing time because we continue to operate 71 until the new one is complete. Has that been considered?
It has been considered. We discussed that on a staff level, and you know, that is also some prime real estate for retail and commercial. So there's there's a trade-off there, right? It's right there in the location that we have with Desert Willow, potential other entertainment venues that may be coming there, the Marriott hotel that's right across the street. So we did look at it, and it's something that we could look at further. It certainly hasn't been cast in stone. If we receive direction from the council to move forward in that way, that is one of the things that we would look at.
And I would just note on this slide as well, again, and my apologies, we did not move the station equipment over to we left it on the other page. That would change what the general fund contribution is because it is shown here and it would be covered by the fire facilities fee. And the 12 million that Lori spoke of about Station 71 and the replacement, I'd just like to also note that the replacement and the modernization reconstruction of the same facility, so in other words, a rehabilitation of the existing station, were almost exactly the same amount of money. So a deconstruction and a rebuild was the same as actually trying to modify the existing station with construction costs.
The only other slide that I had was just what some next steps might look like if the council wanted to move forward with the 4th station, what it would look like. So we would anticipate creating a subcommittee that would consist of a couple of council members, city manager, project staff, our fire partners, to work out some of these questions, to then contract with an architect. That would take us into April or June of 2022. If we were to use the same model and the same template, the design that they're using in Indio, and I believe, Chief Beverland, that you're using the same basic template for some other cities as well for a fire station as the one that they're constructing in Indio?
The one in Indio is a little bit more unique compared to the rest of the system, but we basically have 3 developed sets of plans working throughout the county right now.
So if we were to use one of these developed sets of plans that are already, vetted and ready to go, they're, close enough, we could then get a project plan check February to June. The project could be ready to bid in November, and so on and so forth to completion in between January and June of 2024. That would be the next steps for that 4th station. And then the way that staff foresees it in a, if you then wanted to move forward with 71, we would start design for that in the next year, 23, 24, and then staging as we go forward, so that in each year we would have one in design, one in construction, and then one opening.
Okay, clearly, these decision points need to come back to us on action agendas, but as your slide suggests, let's see if anyone has any key questions we didn't draw out as we were going that will help staff with their work between now and then.
Councilmember Quintanilla?
My only question is in regards to getting an update and revisiting the Portola interchange project.
Yeah, I can go ahead and hit that real quick. As we stated in our last work session on this, the project is at least $100 million over the initial estimates. I mean, our last project budget was about $115 to $120 million. We have $15 million set aside. It is ranked near the bottom of CBAG's interchange projects. They have no money to put towards this project. Federal funding, we've been spending the last several months looking at funds on that project, and it just does not meet the criteria that the federal government is funding, and that is congestion mitigation. With no interchange there creating congestion, it by definition can't qualify for those funds. So that is part of the issue we're having. If the council really wanted to move that forward at some future point, my guess is that you're going to see those costs escalate further than 115 million, and you probably are looking at a dedicated source of revenue from a sales tax increase or something like that on the case. But right now, I think we feel like the Station 4 in rebuilding the current two stations are in need. They will have an immediate impact on services, and it's probably better to put that money to work now versus it just continuing to lose any purchasing power with that project.
Okay, we've got two hands, but clearly this is not the time when we will be making that decision. The purpose of the study session is to alert us that decision is on the horizon. Let's take Sabby and Gina, and then we'll be pretty much done.
You got it. Thank you. So because the Portola interchange and the funding of the new station are related, and that it appears that we may need to sacrifice the Portola interchange in order to move forward with Fire Station 4, can we at some point address the issue of Portola? Because if we're going to make a formal decision to abandon it, okay, but we've got the land planned for the interchange, and I think we own some land out there. So let's look at that issue and make a decision about how to move forward on it, and then how to put that land to better use and better design if there's not going to be an interchange there. Yep. Thank you.
Mayor Kelly, just quickly, I've met with CBAG on a few occasions before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and after well, we're still in the pandemic, but 3 times. And I've come to the conclusion, based on the evidence from CBAG, the Portola interchange is not going to be happening in the next several years. So I just wanted to underscore that point. And I'm sure any one of us council members could have a meeting with Mr. Kirk and get updated on it if there's questions on it. Thank you.
Okay, clearly this issue will need to be teed up for deliberation and decision. So thank you for those appetizers. We'll close the study session, and the closed session will start at 10 minutes after 3.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for all
Thank
the
you.
information.
Thank you.